Hello and welcome to Open Line, live on Home TV. I'm Eric Sherman. Thank you for joining us. Our topic this evening is regarding Michigan's no-fault auto insurance law, including the attempts to reform it, as well as the effects the law has on auto insurance prices across the state. With the help of our guest panel, we will discuss the details of the law and address any questions that you, the viewer, would like clarified. But to do that, we're going to need your help. So we're encouraging you watching this broadcast live on August 10th to join in the conversation by calling with questions to the phone number 517-349-1232, or you can tweet and use Facebook to ask us a question using the handle HOMTV. First, I would like to introduce our guests this evening. We have Kevin Clinton, the Executive Director of the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, and Steve Sinas, who is legal counsel, for CPAN, the Coalition Protecting Auto No Fault. But before we get started with the interview, I'd like to give you both an opportunity to introduce yourself. And Mr. Clinton, why don't we start with you?
My name is Kevin Clinton. I am an actuary by trade. I am a former CEO of MEMIC Insurance Company, an auto and home company. Former CEO of AP Capital, which is a medical malpractice company. Former insurance commissioner, former state treasurer. I have a lot of formers. And former professor of actuarial science at Michigan State University.
Okay, great. And Mr. Sinas?
My name is Stephen Sinas. I'm a partner at the Sinas Dramis Law Firm. We're headquartered in Lansing, and we also have offices in Grand Rapids. I do serve as legal counsel for the Coalition for Protecting Auto No Fault. I'm also an adjunct professor of law at Michigan State University Law School, teaching their no fault insurance course, and I have some other professional associations as well, but I think those are what pertain to tonight's topic.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here this evening. Let's get started with some of our prepared questions as we wait for the questions from you. Again, 517-349-1232 if you'd like to participate in tonight's live open line show on Michigan's no-fault auto insurance law. And you can also tweet or use Facebook with the handle @HomeTV. So, to start off, when I was younger and I heard no-fault insurance, I thought that, well, that's great. It just means if I get in an accident, you know, it's not my fault. I mean, I don't have to worry about it. You take care of your insurance will take care of yours, my insurance, and we don't even have to exchange insurances. What is no fault, and tell me how I was wrong.
So I think what we're experiencing these days is that everyone has a strong opinion about our no-fault system, and there's a lot to talk about, and hopefully tonight we're going to have a lot of great discussion about it. But I think it's really essential for us to understand what the system is all about. And so your characterization of it is not necessarily wrong, but it's a little too simplistic. So let me try to explain to the viewers what the system's all about. And let me go back to what the system was for auto accidents before no fault. And that system was one of what they refer to as traditional tort law in America. And tort law is your traditional legal basis for personal injury actions. And in a tort law state, if somebody does something that's negligent or fails to use reasonable care, they can be sued, and they can be sued for all the damages caused by their negligence. So the way that worked in auto accidents is if there was an at-fault driver, the person who was injured would pursue all their damages. And by damages, I mean the medical expenses they incur, their loss of income, their loss of household chores or their ability to do household chores, and then also the pain and suffering damage claim. So that sounds all well and good from a personal responsibility standpoint that we're going to pursue those damages from the at-fault driver. But what was happening is that auto accidents happened so much throughout the state, and it was such a public health crisis that so many people were incurring medical costs. Maybe some people had some fault, the other driver had some fault. Fault had to be litigated in order for anything to be paid. And so the medical providers were not able to get paid under that system in any type of expedient or efficient way. A lot of times the medical bills would go unpaid, especially if the person didn't, or a person was at fault to some degree. So no fault was a policy that was being implemented across the United States back in the 1970s, and states enacted various forms of no-fault insurance. And so what it really does is it requires people who own a motor vehicle to buy this type of coverage called no-fault insurance. And no-fault insurance is there to pay for the person's medical expenses, and this is no-fault insurance in Michigan, by the way. Pay the person's medical expenses, their loss of income for 3 years, and some household chore services known as replacement services for 3 years. So you have these limited damages for work loss and replacement services. But the thing that makes Michigan no-fault unique compared to any other state in the United States is that the definition of the medical expenses it covers is very broad. And it says that the insurance company has to pay for all reasonably necessary expenses for the person's care, recovery, or rehabilitation. And people often say Michigan no-fault is unlimited if they mean that it doesn't have a limit in terms of a monetary cap or a time limit that somebody can claim medical expenses. That is true. But I would also point out that the limitations are whatever is reasonably necessary, and that the charges that the insurance company have to pay are a reasonable charge. So Michigan no-fault provides this great amount of coverage. And I'm going to talk about the at-fault driver claim in a second, but I just want to reflect a little bit about what I see no-fault insurance doing for people who are catastrophically injured. If you are paralyzed or you sustain a severe traumatic brain injury, your life is forever affected, and so is the life of your loved ones as a result of that, who have to care for you, who have to make sure you have your treatment. And I see that those who are catastrophically injured, the Michigan no-fault insurance system does wonders for them and their families so they can have some semblance of a decent life, even though they might have such horrific injuries. So those people don't have a cap on their coverage or a limit on how much they can claim. So that's the design of the system, is to cover those people and cover those who are seriously injured so they have a source of payment. Now, as far as the at-fault driver claim, let me go back and emphasize something. Those no-fault benefits are paid regardless of fault. So if I'm in an accident and somebody else causes it, I still go to my insurance company, typically speaking, to get those benefits. And then if I caused the accident, I still go to my insurance company. So with respect to the at-fault driver claim, say I'm injured in an accident and it was someone else's fault, I still go to my no-fault insurance for my no-fault benefits, but my claims for the at-fault driver are limited to my pain and suffering damages and any income loss beyond 3 years that is otherwise payable under no fault. So you have excess economic loss and pain and suffering. And that's the only damage you can recover from the at-fault driver. And to give your viewers a better understanding and appreciation for what that means, the No Fault Act actually immunizes all of us for medical expenses in the event we make a mistake and hurt somebody. So we don't have the exposure of millions of dollars of medical care. We're only limited to the exposure of pain and suffering damages and excess economic loss. And I know that some of the questions tonight want to get at the threshold injury standard in no fault, but if you don't mind, I want to touch on that real quick. That standard, it only applies to those pain and suffering damages. And it basically says this, that if you are injured as a result of someone else's negligence, you can recover pain and suffering damages, but only if you have a serious injury. And a serious injury is either death, permanent serious disfigurement, which is like a really bad scar or an amputation, or your body function has to be seriously impaired and has to affect your ability to lead your normal life. So if you can't show you're seriously injured, you don't have a claim for those damages against the at-fault driver. So what we have is this bifurcated system where we're all assured payment of our medical expenses from our own insurance, and we can recover limited damages from the at-fault driver. And that's basically how the system's set up. So with that, I want to stop talking and turn it over to some more questions, but maybe the questions will further illustrate how the system actually works in reality.
Okay, great. And do you have anything to add, Mr.
Yeah, I'll just emphasize one thing and really talk about the intent of the law and changing over to a no-fault law so we can take a look at it and say, is it working? I mean, this was the original intent. But under a fault system, you ended up with two drivers hitting each other. One might be injured, as you said, had medical expenses, and it would go to court. There'd be a suit. It was clogging up our whole legal system, and parties weren't paid until the suit was settled, so that you may have unpaid medical bills, and it didn't seem to be working. So the idea behind no fault is accidents are going to happen, and we know they're going to happen. So let's not sit around and go to court and determine whose insurance company should be paying yours or mine. Your insurance company pays for your losses. My insurance company pays for my losses. We keep it out of the court system. We lower the cost. We keep the attorneys not involved, and that should help lower the cost. And that was the goal. I mean, have lower costs, have a more efficient system, and keep things out of the legal system.
And as executive director of the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, right. How does the MCCA, what's their role in no fault and helping with the cap and,
right.
and
I think
payments?
No fault took effect in Michigan in 1973. By 1978, I think they knew they had an issue. And as Steve said, Michigan is kind of unique. We have unlimited medical benefits for your entire life. So if you're injured in an accident and you might be a passenger, a teenager or 10 years old, you're entitled to medical benefits for injuries that, for medical procedures that resulted from that injury for your lifetime. And what happened was many of these small insurance companies took a look at this and said, this can result in huge losses. And if I'm unlucky enough to get one large loss, it could wipe out my entire company. So they tried to buy reinsurance, and reinsurance is just a method of sending the risk to maybe another larger insurance company, a portion of the risk. But your traditional reinsurance companies were either priced too high or wouldn't take any of the risk themselves because they didn't like unlimited. So the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association was formed. And every insurance company in the state is required to be a member of the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association. And what we do is we're a reimbursement company. So, and we take some of the risk. So the insurance companies basically pool their money and we charge policyholders. And the Michigan Catastrophic Claims pays claims or reimburses claims that your insurance company pays above a certain threshold. That threshold today is $555,000. So your insurance company pays the entire claim, but once their costs hit $555,000, the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association reimburses them for any cost above $555,000.
And you said the insurance companies help and pool. I mean, where does the funding come?
If you look at your policy, most policies will on their deck page, will identify that as a Michigan Catastrophic Claims charge. It's $170 per year right now, per car. Some companies will not show it directly, but put it under their PIP, personal injury protection charge. And it's included in there, but we charge each carrier $150 or $170 per car per year right now. It changes every year, the amount.
And can I just add, with regard to deck sheets, first of all, I wish I would have brought one today to maybe show on camera, but I want to encourage your viewers to try to pull out their deck sheet, as it's called, their declaration page. And if you remember, when you get your insurance policy renewed, or if you get a new insurance policy, you're sent the actual policy, but then there's a one-page sheet that summarizes your coverages. If you look closely, there is a coverage for liability. That's if you make a mistake. Okay, I'm just trying to go through this real quick. Liability means when you make a mistake and somebody wants to bring a claim against you for those limited damages I talked about, that's the coverage you have to pay those damages. There's also no-fault PIP, and that's what is the no-fault insurance that we're talking about today. That's the individual premium you pay for that coverage. As Kevin alluded to, there are some companies that rope in the MCCA assessment fee into the premium dollars, but others just have it as a separate line item. So when you see no-fault PIP and MCCA, those two combined is what that's what it costs for you to have this type of coverage we're talking about. There are also some other coverages like collision coverage that covers your vehicle, and you might have broad form, you have comprehensive. So that's the coverage you have for your vehicle. Also, just real quick, some people might see uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. That's when you've been hit by somebody else, but they don't have enough liability insurance to cover your pain and suffering damages. Then you can make a claim from your own insurance company for those damages. So I just want to go through, if anyone wants to pull out their deck page and try to remember what I just went over, hopefully that'll help you understand what those coverages are all about.
And go ahead and pull out your deck page and use 349-1232 and call with a question for it. Now that we've kind of given a background and better understand it, the Insurance Alliance of Michigan makes the claim that no-fault insurance, the no-fault law in Michigan is broken. And would you say that's accurate? And if so, what needs to be done?
I think there needs to be reform. Is it completely broken? No, and I think it can be fixed. But I do think we need some changes in the law. If you go back and look at the intent of changing over to no-fault was a cost reduction. That hasn't happened. Our rates are skyrocketing. Particularly in Detroit. Michigan probably has the third highest rates in the country. Detroit as a city probably has the highest rates in the country as an individual city. The uninsured population is growing because basically they can't afford it. It's estimated, and sometimes it's difficult to tell, but it's estimated that the city of Detroit has 50% of their population that's uninsured in driving. The assigned claims facility that covers uninsured paid $250 million last year. The Free Press estimated that 2/3 of our civil lawsuits in this state are auto claims. So it's clogging up our legal system again. And it's really hindering economic development. If you take a city like Detroit that is coming back and all of a sudden somebody has to pay $4,000 or $5,000 for their insurance, it hinders people moving into the city and it hurts our economic development, not only in Detroit, but throughout the state.
Yeah, my response is that I agree with Kevin that the system does need to be improved, and but it's still doing a lot of good. I understand Kevin's points there about how the system may not be functioning as it's intended, and I generally agree with that. There might be some differences, though, in my perspective from my experience representing injured people and the groups I'm aligned with, that maybe I have differences in how the system can be improved. But let me just kind of go with an overview of some issues I see in the system. With regard to why it's become so litigious, there are stories of certain medical providers charging too much or people making fraudulent claims. But there's also a lack of real strong enforcement against insurance companies to make sure they pay the claims and make sure they pay them timely. So in general, I would say that one of the improvements have to be some type of greater enforcement, some type of incentive to make insurance companies pay claims so that they know that they got to pay them or they're going to face some consequence for not doing so. I represent too many people who have been denied claims they shouldn't be. So that's one part of the issue. When it comes down to other reasons why there's so many lawsuits, that's also a complicated thing to summarize, because there are a lot of cases that have been decided either rightly or wrongly by our appellate courts that have created more intricacies and more reasons why people need to file lawsuits. So in general, the group Coalition for Protecting Auto No Fault, which I'm affiliated with, their reform package seeks to try to correct some of those inefficiencies created by some of these cases. One example I can give your viewers, and there's a lot of statistics to back this up. In 2005, the Supreme Court issued a decision in the case called DeVillers versus ACIA. And in that case, the court overturned previous case law that said the 1-year rule to file a lawsuit against an insurance company who haven't paid benefits is tolled until the insurance company formally denies the claim. That was the judicial tolling. Long story short, the Supreme Court overruled that, and so it said that that 1-year rule that's prescribed in the No Fault Act has to be strictly enforced. And because of that, more and more lawsuits have been filed since 2005. So there are a lot of different things, whether it's, and I definitely agree that fraudulent claims should be dealt with, and there should be some more greater enforcement against those. But the insurance companies also have to have reasons to pay claims, and some of these inefficiencies created by the case law has to be improved.
We do have a call. We have Ashlyn from Okemos. Go ahead with your question, Ashlyn. Ashlyn, did we lose you? All right, we're going to try to reconnect. And but while we do, I'm sorry, I think I can hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ashlyn. I have a question for the guest.
Yes, please. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, okay. So there are 12 states in the U.S. that follow the no-fault insurance model. I was wondering, why are we a state that does not do what the majority of the U.S. does?
I think I heard the question. I think, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but she said that there are 12 other states, and how did Michigan end up in the minority of states that have a Michigan no-fault, or I'm sorry, have a no-fault system? Well, we chose, along with several states in the 70s, to adopt it, and I don't know exactly what the number was back then, but it was more than 12, and some of them got rid of it. Now, I will say that Michigan has addressed the issue of whether it wants to reform its system several times over the last few decades, whether it's through proposed legislation that didn't pass, or there was even an instance in 1993 where legislation did pass, but the voters of Michigan, through a referendum that was put on the ballot by a percentage margin, I think of 65 to 35, about rejected it, and so the legislation basically was then null and void through the referendum. So the people of Michigan actually went out to the polls in the 1990s and said, let's keep this system. So basically the answer to the question is that there hasn't been enough support to override it. The other thing I'll throw out there is that, and I think I already alluded to it, but Michigan's system is different than all those other 12 states because it doesn't have a cap on coverage. All those other states have a cap on coverage. The no-fault insurers only have to pay, some states are $50,000, some states are $10,000. I think New Jersey's $250,000, but Michigan doesn't have that cap.
I will add, of those 12 states you talked about, 3 of those are actually, you can choose between buying fault or no fault insurance. So they're not a pure no fault insurance company or insurance state. And Steve's right, Michigan is unique. We have unlimited medical coverage for your lifetime. The highest requirement of any other no fault state is New York with $50,000. They require you to buy a minimum of $50,000. A state like Florida has a $10,000 requirement. And actually, during legislation a couple of years ago, tried to get rid of PIP off coverage. Your entire auto claim would be handled either by a lawsuit, your savings, or your health insurance.
And I want to get back to breaking down the states and talk a little bit more about that. But before we do, you said 1973 was when Michigan adopted no-fault insurance, and what, Mr. Clinton, you made the comment that it's not really working right now like it was intended. If in 1973 other states did this, what was the impetus? What moved us to change from what it was? And is it just because it's litigious now that it's not working as it's intended?
I would think yes, that the intention was to lower the cost and to keep the suits out of the court system because it was clogging it up. And this was done by a professor named Jeffrey O'Connell, and they were researching no fault in the early 1970s. And I think a lot of states thought it made sense and wanted to try it.
And let me also add to the conversation here. We call it auto insurance, but it's really health insurance. It's a health insurance issue, right? It's health insurance for auto accidents. That's what really no fault is. So, we have this bigger debate going on in the country about health insurance in general and how we should be covered. But auto accidents remain one of the biggest sources of medical treatment. And so, part of the underlying premise of the whole system is let's make sure people are covered. And I also want to throw out there, and not to get politically ideological, because that's not where I'm taking this, but I just want to make this point that those who don't want the government to have to pay for things, no-fault insurance was designed to be a private insurance solution to a big societal problem of the cost of medical treatment for auto accident injuries. And the way that works is that it requires people who buy a vehicle to buy this insurance, and the insurance will pay the claim rather than there not being coverage and it going to the state through Medicaid or Medicare. So there is this health insurance component, and it is private funding for auto accidents.
Okay, now going back to specific states, I know New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky, all motorists can reject the threshold and retain the right to sue for any auto-related injury. Is that a reform that would be good for Michigan, or how does that work for them?
Well, I think if you're looking at that, you're looking at something that has both a fault and a no-fault aspect to it. And it would do nothing but raise costs in Michigan. New Jersey has the highest rates in the nation. And they have fault and no fault, and apparently I wasn't familiar with that, but the New Jersey no fault system has an opportunity to sue with no threshold. I would just think that would explode costs here.
And Mr. Sinas, you mentioned that there were opportunities that with no fault you could have add-ons, or you could opt to pay certain amounts of liability. What?
Okay, so I guess going back to that deck sheet explanation, You don't have an option with no fault to limit your coverage.
I'm sorry, right now in Michigan
Yes,
you don't.
you
but,
don't,
But
yes.
other states do, right?
Other states do on
Okay.
no fault, but in Michigan what you can elect is additional coverage for liability insurance. Right now, all motorists are required to buy $20,000 of liability insurance. That amount has not been changed since I think 1968 or something like that. It's been a long time, but $20,000 is the minimum. And then when it comes to that other form of coverage I talked about with uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, that's all elective. You don't have to buy that, and you can buy anywhere up to $50,000 to $1 million of that. So yeah, you have elected coverages there, but no fault is something that is mandatory.
And one of the tort reform measures that has been on the table, you know, over the past several years and is probably on the table now is PIP choice. So you're required now to buy unlimited medical coverage. And what's on the table is let people choose what limit. If you want $1 million of coverage, if you want $500,000 of coverage, $50,000 of coverage, whatever it is your choice. And obviously, the lower the limit, the lower your premium.
And with regard to PIP choice, I mean, first of all, full disclosure, that is something that CPAN certainly totally disagrees with. And I'll try to give some insight into why without being, you know, too much of an advocate here. I just want to get people to understand the reasoning behind the opposition. Let me go back to the issue against the at-fault driver. We all don't have that exposure. The No Fault Act says we can't be sued for medical, right, if we make a mistake. So if you sell PIP choice policies that are capped at $50,000 or $100,000, the person, you know, who's seriously injured is going to blow through that coverage. They're not going to be able to recover the medical from the at-fault driver, and then the rest of their treatment would have to be funded by the state. So with regard to improvements to the system, the point of view of CPAN is that a PIP choice makes it no longer no fault. It makes it something fundamentally different, and that the system as we know it cannot really survive a PIP choice bill, because it would fundamentally just change how everything is dealt with in terms of the coverages and the limitations on medical treatment.
And I would just respond to that by saying there's many states that have much lower PIP limits than we do. Like I said, in Florida it's $10,000. In New York, the minimum is $50,000, or maximum minimum is $50,000, and it tends to work there. I mean, their system has worked, and the opponents or the proponents of PIP choice will tell you that, you know, it's better to have some insurance than no insurance. If you can't afford unlimited medical, it's better to have some layer of coverage in there instead of going uninsured, because you have the same problem with the uninsured. They get in an accident, the state's going to pay for it.
I'm sure we're going to get into more questions on cost of insurance, so I don't want to just go right into it. But I didn't mean to make this point. People should look at their deck sheet for all the reasons I said before, so they can understand their coverages. But you should also look at how much each coverage costs. And depending on where you live, you may see a different proportion of your policy costing a certain amount. But for me in Ingham County, my no-fault coverage is somewhere between 30 and 35% of my premium. The rest is like for my vehicle and the other forms of coverages that I've identified. So when you're talking about changing no-fault, you know, in Detroit it might be closer to 40% of the coverage, but it's not the whole policy. It's not like, you know, 80% of our premiums are going to no-fault. It's somewhere between 30 and maybe upwards in the most egregious situation up to like 55%, 60%. So it's still not the full cost of insurance. So if you change it and you really limit that coverage, the question becomes, well, will the cost of insurance really go down that much? So
We have a viewer that wants to participate in the conversation. Shane Goodall has a tweet comment for us. No fault. HOMTV, No Fault Act in Michigan is great and should not be changed. Only those needing the No Fault Act know the benefits. I come from a non-no fault state. Shane, thank you for your contribution, and I'd ask the panel to comment on this.
Well, I agree, Shane. No, but I will say that, you know, I again, going back to the idea that we have a good system in general, but I do believe, you know, it can be improved. I do believe we made it more efficient.
And we have people that live in, you know, when you rate an insurance policy, one of the big factors is what territory do you live in. So you'll have some territories that have lower rates which are, it's less litigious, it's smaller or fewer people live there, lower traffic density. You go into Detroit and you have a much higher cost. So maybe in a different situation than the viewer was.
Great. Well, again, I want to thank Shane for participating. And if you would like to participate in this evening's live open line show on Michigan's no-fault auto insurance law, please call in with questions for our guests by dialing 517-349-1232, or participate, as Shane did, through social media on Twitter and Facebook using our handle @HOMTV. Once again, we have Kevin Clinton, the Executive Director of the Michigan Catastrophic Claim Association, and Steve Sinas, who is the legal counsel for CPAN, the Coalition Protecting Auto No Fault, in the studio with us today. So Shane talks about being a part of a state that is no fault. And I do want to clarify, too, that I believe I'm right. It's not only states. I believe Puerto Rico also is a no-fault territory. But my question I would have is, excluding the no-fault, what are other states using that aren't using no-fault? And I know you're not proponents of no-fault, but you just think it needs reform. But would those possibly be a better option for Michigan?
Well, I think if you're not a no-fault state, you're a fault state. And no, I don't think either of us disagree that no fault is in need of reform, but is probably a better system. So we'll agree with your viewer, and I think we agree. I think we may disagree on what reforms need to be enacted to do that, but I think everybody in the room, at least, is in favor of a no-fault system.
And actually, our firm has a small office in Chicago, and they're a tort law state for auto accidents. And when you have the at-fault driver and the person who wasn't at fault is hurt, and there's enough liability insurance, usually there can be a recovery that works for that person. But again, when there's an element of fault on both drivers, or there's not enough liability insurance, what happens to the injured person is that they just don't have a source of coverage, and it usually goes to Medicaid or Medicare.
So you brought it up that we would probably be talking about insurance prices. How does no fault, as we have it right now, affect insurance prices for the average driver in Michigan?
It's a loaded question. You can whatever you want to do. If you want to go first.
Sure.
Okay.
I think just the fact that Michigan has unlimited medical benefits makes it a very expensive state. I mean, our coverage in Michigan is higher than I think it's the third highest in the nation. And part of that is having unlimited medical benefits. So, I mean, you have the Cadillac of all policies, and you have to pay a Cadillac price to get that.
I'd agree with as far as how we compare to other states, it is true that Michigan is, pretty high up there. Whether it's the most expensive or third most or fifth most, I hear different studies determine different things there, but it is up there. But it is clearly the best coverage for I always say to clients, the only good news about your accident, if it occurred in Michigan, was that you're in Michigan compared to any other state, because it's the best coverage in the United States. So one would think that it should cost more. The thing I don't want to get too much into it, because we might not have time and it might not be the place to really get into the details, but how rates are set in Michigan is something that there isn't a whole lot of analysis out there that the insurance companies share. And there are reasons to believe that, to some extent, factors that really don't have to do with the risk of whether somebody's going to be in an accident are being factored into how rates are set. The ones that I have heard that are used by some companies in Michigan is if you have a lapse in coverage, if you had automobile insurance but for some reason you stopped it and you try to buy it again, it's going to cost you more to buy it again than if you just continued it. There's also a weird situation where some companies charge genders a little bit different price. There's a study that showed that women are charged a certain higher amount. There's also a weird situation where those who are in the military and they go serve abroad and they come home, they may face a higher cost. So, you know, Mr. Clinton is the actuary, and so I certainly am not more of an expert than him. But what I'm trying to draw attention to is that the blanket statement that this unlimited no-fault is the reason why it's so expensive is something that I don't quite accept, because it doesn't seem that all these other factors are being addressed enough for us to understand whether, you know, insurance rates could really be brought down if some factors that seem kind of unfair aren't part of the equation.
So let me ask, do accidents that do not involve a personal injury payout, do those affect the cost in Michigan, or is it primarily the medical payouts that are really the big difference?
It could be an at-fault accident where you get an offender bender with somebody else. So at-fault accidents will. I think the one item which people get upset about is credit scoring. So companies rate you based upon your credit score. The higher the credit score, the lower your rates, because statistics have borne out that the people that have high credit scores have better loss experience. It's just another rating factor. Some states allow that, like Michigan, and some states don't.
I might be accused of another loaded question, but and feel free not to answer, but what do insurance companies want? I mean, are the insurance companies in favor of Michigan's no fault? Are they happy with it, or would they rather go to a tort, or even just reform?
I guess the quick thing I can add is that from what I've experienced in being involved with like the legislative issues and the reform debate over the last several years, is that it seems like certain companies want more change than other companies. So depending on the size of the company, depending on the company's prerogatives, you know, it's not necessarily a consistent position throughout the industry.
Mm-hmm. I would say in general, most companies want to keep the no fault, but they want reform to it. And they have proposed numerous things throughout the last few years. De-insurance we talked about was one of them. PIP choice was another one. A fee schedule would be a third one that they look at to cap losses. So they're in favor of those type of reforms to keep losses low. In looking at the cost, I mean, you could look at something in Michigan. Michigan has, when you go up to the MCCA level, it's $555,000 before we start reimbursing the companies. So even if you drop the threshold from unlimited to $555,000, everybody would save $170 per car every year. So you can at least measure that savings. You wouldn't need the MCCA. I'd be out of a job, but people would be saving $170 a year per car.
And honestly, how does Michigan compare? I mean, I know you mentioned New Jersey has some of the highest costs. New York is high. People in Michigan obviously feel like it's a burden, but as far as the other states, how do we rate as far as insurance rates?
Like I said, I think we're pretty high up there. I see different studies, you know, somewhere in the top 5, always top 10, if not, you know, these days up in the top 5.
The last figure I heard was third in the country.
And would you agree that the threshold system reduces costs?
Well, let's make sure we understand when we say the threshold system, what we're talking about is that those who are injured in an accident, but that those injuries don't really seriously affect the person's life. Maybe they, you know, need a few weeks of treatment and they're in pain for a short while, but they can't really show that their ability to lead their normal life has been affected in any significant way. They just don't have a claim against the at-fault driver. So when we buy our liability insurance, it's actually in the liability side where the savings comes in, because the actuaries on the liability side can look at it like we only have to pay for serious injuries, and there's only so many serious injuries in the state, and we're not going to have to pay these pain and suffering claims on just a more minor injury case. So the idea, the trade-off between those, that full amount of coverage on no fault, is that you're only going to be able to recover those pain and suffering damages on serious injuries. So it is a cost savings measure.
Yeah, some states have what they call a verbal threshold, like Michigan. So it's serious impairment of a bodily function, or you know, loss of a limb or something. But and it describes the type of injury that you're allowed to sue under. But some states have a dollar threshold, so it might be 100,000 or 200. So it's easier to imagine if you're looking at it from a dollar standpoint. The lower you drop that, the more suits you're going to get into the system. So if you drop it down to 50,000, you get one result. If you drop it down to $25,000 in damages, you get another one. So the lower you drop that, and in the verbal one, the more expansive you make that instead of, you know, specific serious injuries. If you make it less serious, you're going to generate more suits and have higher rates.
There's still time to participate. Calling us at 349-1232. Also using Twitter or Facebook, handle @HOMTV. Why is reform failed up to this point? I mean, I know that reports of all of the different attempts to reform no fault, not even talking about repealing it. Why hasn't there been success up to this point?
Well, I'll just explain that from my experience over the last, especially since 2010, it's when the latest reform efforts really started again. I mean, there were other times in the past, but for the last 6 years, there's been this attempt to fundamentally change the system. And throughout that time period, there have been some attempts for those in the insurance industry and those perhaps on what I'll say is my side with CPAN and other affiliated groups to perhaps try to consider compromises on some of these issues. But for one reason or the other, the bills that have been floated break away from the compromise, and they're much more drastic measures. So what you have are drastic measures being performed that are being proposed, and then so the opposition to, you know, fundamentally changing the no-fault system then comes out and says, no way, we don't want that bill. That's not the right way to change it. So it's like these extremes result in no action. And you know, the prediction is that this fall is going to be really active on the no-fault issue in the legislature. And I certainly hope that everyone can see that the past few years of these extreme positions have gotten us nowhere, and it's time to really think about what makes sense and not look at this as some type of entrenched position, but we're going to look at what makes sense and find that right compromise on these issues so that the system really does work for the people in Michigan. And
I still want to give you an opportunity to answer that, Mr. Clinton, but CPAN on its website has like 24 reforms that it's tried to pass,
yes.
Right? Well, what are some of those?
Well, some of those reforms have been proposed in the past, but now the package has been put together, a 24-point package. Your viewers can look at it at cpan.us, www.cpan.us. And you know, I'm not going to itemize every single one. I'm going to try to categorize them, okay? So with respect to the biggest part of the reform that CPAN is offering, it is a fee schedule. And it's a fee schedule so that the rates that medical providers are paid are more set and established so that we don't have to litigate that issue as much. However, in proposing that fee schedule, which is a big step for a group like CPAN, who didn't really want historically for there to be a fee schedule, but they're willing to do it for the sake of the efficiency of the system, but they want, as a contingency to that, consumer protections for injured people to get their claims paid quicker and to make sure insurance companies pay the claims. So it's like, okay, fine, we'll accept a set amount of payment for our services, but we want to be assured that those are going to be paid, that we're not going to have to hire lawyers, that we're not going to have to litigate, that we're not going to have a bunch of petty issues in our way, and that you're going to pay the claim promptly. And so CPAN really looks at it like this is the best win-win for everybody. The cost of care will go down, but that claims will be paid more promptly, so the cost of litigation will also come down. So the other reforms have to do with changing some case law that have undermined the rights of the most severely injured. There's some case law that deals with handicap accessible transportation, and it deals with housing, and so there's a fix there to make sure that those people have an easier time pursuing handicap accessible transportation and housing. There's also some changes to the residual bodily liability limits. I referred those were $20,000 that have not been adjusted since the 1960s. CPAN's proposing that those are increased too, so that people who have the at-fault driver claim can have you know, a more money than $20,000 to recover. So it's hard for me to summarize it, and I can go into more detail if people have questions, but the idea is let's make it more efficient on the insurer side, and let's make it more efficient on the claimant side. The other thing is a dual fraud authority. The fraud authority piece had been proposed by the insurance industry as a way of going after those who are making fraudulent claims. I don't support those people who make fraudulent claims. I think they, really hurt the system. So yes, they should be regulated, but CPAN's proposal is let's deal with them, but let's also deal with some of the bad faith that can exist with the insurance companies. And a lot of insurance companies do the right thing, but some of them don't, and some of them cause people to be in litigation when they shouldn't. So CPAN's reform package tries to make it a two-way street there.
And again, CPAN is the Coalition for Protecting Auto No Fault.
Yes, and I will explain. The group is an interesting group. Normally, it's got strange bedfellows, so to speak. We have medical providers who have teamed up with the Trial Lawyer Association, who are basically saying, hey, this does work for the care of people. For the trial lawyers who represent injured people, they're saying, hey, we don't want to go back to a tort system and not have a source of payment. We want to keep this system because we see what it does for our clients. And the medical providers are trying to say, hey, we can provide great services to people if we have this system. So it's this interesting combination of forces. That's why it's called the coalition. And so it's not just one interest group, it's many groups banded together to preserve the system.
Mr. Clinton, why haven't these reforms passed, in your opinion?
I'll give you two reasons, and the two major reasons. I think the first one is costs. Okay, we don't have a fee schedule, and providers, healthcare providers, get their income in various ways. They can get it from workers' comp insurance, they can get it from Blue Cross and Blue Shield and other health insurers, Medicare, Medicaid, but the top dollar that they charge is to the auto carriers. They pay the most. And let me give you an example. I had a friend who got hit by hit by a car riding a bicycle. Went into the local hospital, had some CT scans, got checked out. He walked into the hospital, walked out of the hospital. The charge for that was $8,500. Okay, we took his bill and gave it to his his insurance company, his auto insurance company. And we got that priced out. How much would that insurance company have paid had it been covered under his insurance policy rather than his health care policy? And it was $19,000, over twice what it costs the health insurance. So the auto carriers pay what they call the master list charge. And figure it like it's the sticker price on a car. They're paying top dollar and everybody else is getting discounts. And in one of the proposals that we had a number of years ago, we proposed to pay an average. So we said, let's take out Medicare, that doesn't pay very much. Let's take out Medicaid, and let's average what you get from workers' comp and the commercial, and that's what we'll pay. We'll just pay the average, and that was turned down immediately. So I think there are medical providers and the attorneys have found their little niche here, and what happens in that is they benefit by keeping the system the way it is now. So I think number one is we're paying a lot of money for exactly the same services at exactly the same hospitals with exactly the same doctors, and the cost can be, as you saw in the example, twice. So everybody pays for that. Everybody who buys auto insurance ends up paying for that. The second thing, and I think we'll all agree to this one, is fraud and abuse. And being over at the MCCA, you see a lot of it. And let me give you some examples. We had an airplane had to medevac somebody from Montana over to Michigan. We got it priced out to fly that person, that injured party, back. The airlines discovered that we were the Michigan catastrophic claims and the auto carriers and wanted $400,000, until we stepped in and found out that their regular rates were somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000, and we ended up paying somewhere in between there. But that would have been a huge charge for us. We have people on massage therapy. Okay, we had a person on massage therapy, submitted bills, got paid, found out this person never got a massage and charged $350,000. We have another person who is getting attendant care. And attendant care amounts to 57% of what we pay. You get people that have 24/7 attendant care. In this attendant care, $308,000 a year for a family member with no medical skills. We have, I could give you a number. Transportation, to take a person 2 miles to their doctor, $100 for the round trip. There is fraud and abuse and high charges, and this gets passed on to consumers.
And how many drivers, what percentage did you say of Michigan drivers are uninsured?
I don't know about the whole
okay.
state. It's in I think it's in the low 20s.
Okay.
But I think in Detroit it's probably 50%. Sometimes it's hard to discover who is insured and who isn't, but that's the best.
Well, and I know that there's a big problem where people will get insurance and then have their car and then cancel insurance immediately. And I know that State Representative Peter Lucido from the 36th District, it's reported that he's interested in wanting to have a law ordering insurance companies to immediately report that when a motorist canceled their insurance. Do you think this proposed law would work?
I think in theory, the idea behind it is to make sure people don't game the system like that, right? So, in theory, that's a good objective to have. I did not re-examine that bill. I did at one point analyze it, and I remember there being some measures in there about repossession of the vehicle and some other things about it that seemed to be a little extreme in how to go about it. So I think in general that seems to make sense, but the devil's in the details, and it seems like the details of that bill seem to go a little too far. So I think it's something that could be looked at but maybe modified.
Yes, I'm not familiar with the details of the bill, but right now it's a misdemeanor to drive without insurance, and it isn't stopping a lot of people. I think it may put a dent into it, but I don't think you'll stop it completely.
And people behind the wheel can be as powerful as a weapon. I mean, do you it's a misdemeanor. Do you think, would you advocate for that to be a stronger crime?
I don't think that's I mean, I think it's strong enough as a misdemeanor. Anybody that has the means by which to get auto insurance, they know it's a crime not to do so. I think that makes gives them the incentive to get it.
Sometimes they have no choice. I mean, they have to get to their job somehow. I heard one senator eloquently say that you're forcing my constituents to become criminals.
In the few minutes that we have left, I'm curious. We didn't get a lot of calls. You have answered a lot of my questions. What questions haven't we asked that you think is important in the no-fault Michigan law issue?
One thing I've really been thinking about a lot recently, I think about the future all the time, right? Everyone does, and we're in ever-changing times, and the technology that is changing with us is amazing. And here we have in Michigan the big three on a quest to have autonomous vehicles and computerized driven vehicles. And I think as a state we need to consider, okay, what's the best form of insurance to deal with those vehicles? And I think that's an issue that is intimidating for anybody who thinks about it. And I just want to share this kind of thought with everyone, that the no-fault system might be ahead of its time. When we have more computerized driven vehicles on the road, that's especially a situation where you don't want to litigate fault, because then you're going to have to talk about, well, was the algorithm malfunctioning? Was there something wrong with the vehicle? Did the pedestrian or whoever was hit not do the right thing? And so the system that we have where people can, again, we need to improve it to get back to the goal of that prompt payment of medical expenses. But if we get back to that goal, the no-fault insurance system can really mesh nicely with the autonomous vehicle future that we're looking at here in Michigan. So that's just one interesting thought to throw into the mix while we're talking about, okay, we got these current problems, what do we do about it? Well, let's make it better to deal with the present. But let's also do so with our mind on the future about what we really need going forward.
And would the no fault, I mean, right now, well, let me ask this. Right now, does no fault restrict a owner's ability to go after the manufacturer of a vehicle for
Well, the way I'd sum it up is that nothing about the current no-fault law or the current insurance code has been really modified to fit the situation of autonomous vehicles. I actually testified on some bills about autonomous vehicles, and my basic point was, from a CPAN representative standpoint, that we have no problem with autonomous vehicles. CPAN likes them. They're supposed to be safer, so we have no problems with these bills. But are you guys thinking about the insurance side of things? And after that testimony, I heard from some people from Google and GM and Ford who basically said, oh, we never even thought about that, you know? And so it's just, when it comes down to it, we have these laws that are going to need to be modified and are going to need to be changed somehow to fit this future. And I'm saying that no fault provides a basic framework to work within to make those modifications and make the future make sense.
Well, if you want to reach out to Google, and we can have a second show and bring on.
I would love to.
Mr. Clinton, questions that we didn't ask?
Now maybe just the future of no fault in the state. I'm a little bit concerned because, looking at it from Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association's viewpoint, if you look at our financial statements, we have roughly $20 billion in assets, but our liabilities exceed that by $1.6 billion. So we don't have enough money right now to pay our projected claims. We're going to have to continue to charge down the road. So we have a deficit position of about $225 per driver per car. And I don't want this to get away from us. I think we need some reforms to rein this in because it seems to be going in the wrong direction right now. Our costs are too high, and we don't seem to be able to keep up with them, and we don't seem to be able to keep up with the fraud and abuse in the system. And where there's a lot of money, there's going to be a lot of fraud and abuse. An example, I spoke with the insurance commissioner from the state of Florida, and they did a study, and remember, they have a $10,000 PIP limit, that's all, and ours is unlimited. Their study indicated that there was $80 per policy fraud in PIP for a $10,000 limit. Imagine what it is in Michigan. So I don't want this to get away from us, and I want to make this secure for all the injured parties so that there's enough money in reserve to pay off their claims when they need it. And most of the people that we pay claims on behalf of or reimburse the insurance companies that pay claims on behalf of, they need them. They need this. They need this care, and we have no problem with that. But there's a number of them that, like your teacher used to say, well, you're going to ruin it for everybody. And that's what it seems is happening here. So if we can tighten that up, get rid of the fraud and abuse, keep the costs down, I think we can do a good, something good for all the citizens in the state.
My teacher did say that. How did you know?
Every teacher says that.
And how can we learn more about the MCCA?
You can go to our website. And if you want to learn anything about the MCCA, sometimes people say we're not transparent. You can take a look. You can look at our financial statements. We have about a 200-page financial statement. You can see our assets, our liabilities. You can see how much we paid out last year, what our expenses are. Just for your information, we're also audited by an accounting firm every year, tests our reserves. We're audited by the state of Michigan. We got they made no changes to our financial statement after their audit. So we get quite a few people auditing us and taking a look at the books.
Mr. Sinas, I'm going to give you the last word and also tell us how we can learn more about CPAN.
I just do need to make your viewers aware that they do have that information available on their website, but there also was a big legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court about whether they're subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and the MCCA, this was before Mr. Clinton's time, argued that they weren't. And long story short, the Supreme Court upheld that they didn't have to disclose a lot of rate-making data about how they factor in all the future costs, and so that has not been disclosed to the public. As far as any information, cpan.us has a lot of good information about our side of the story, and so I would recommend your viewers visit that site.
Great, thank you both. That is all the time we have for in our program regarding the Michigan no-fault auto insurance law. We'd like to thank you for watching and for all of the participations from the tweets and the calls that we got. We also want to thank our guests, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Sinas. This program will replay on Home TV, Comcast Channel 21 in Hazlet, Okemos, and East Lansing, and will be available on demand at hometv.net. I'm Eric Sherman. Thank you so much for watching.